Brandy's done, but we spent the
So she's done.
She is done for this generation, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we have over here. Share. Oh, Brandy's done, but we spent it. And here we go. We should make sure that it's sharing properly. Let me share it properly, Baruch Hashem. And we will get started. Okay, today's a little bit of a difficult daf, but I think we'll be able to get through it quite easily. Okay, so today we're learning how we know the living karbanis have to be shechted with something. So what we have here is as follows. Oh, the Zevachim barrel.
Yitvach.
The Gemara right at the top of daf Mem Ches Amar Aleph. It's a very hard daf, and I just realized it's Mem Ches Moyach. It takes the full concentration of our Moyach to be able to get clarity in this daf. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Par Usir Shoyavekapur. Frank Gemara Michti. Let's think about this. Tzafoin Bo'oilotziv. The place where the Torah specifically says that you have to shech by the tzafon, it only says about a korban olah. The Chattas we know because it says by the Chattas you should shech the Chattas where you shech the olah. But the main place where the Torah says tzafon specifically is by olah. So practically more in Nisna olah bereisha. So why did the Mishnah start with shechting par b'shir shal yom kippurim, which are karbonis Chattas, to tell us that it's shichatas and batzafon? It should have started with olah, which is what we would call the flagship case of tzafon. Zok to Gemara Chattas, I need the asim midrasha. Since the Torah doesn't say beferish, we learn it from a drasha. It says b'mokem asher yishchad. So olah chaviv. That's always a halacha that's dear and near to the Tanna's heart. He wants to present it first. Practically more okay, but there's many type of chatois. The nisni chatois hachatzonos. The chatois hachatzonos, those karbonos are actually the karbonos that we learn it from. So why does it start off with par b'shir shel yom kippurim? So Gemara for that, I did the nichnas daman lifnai v'niflim. Since the karbonos of Yom Kippur, the dam is spritzed in the kodesh hakodeshim, chaviv alei. It's more dear to the Tana, and therefore he puts it first. Okay, we got our makar Chattas, we know from olah, but how do we know olah? How do we know that by a korban olah you have to spritz the blood? I'm sorry, you have to do the shechita on the tzafon side of the azar. Zok the Gemara, it says in the pasuk by olah b'shachad oisoi al yerech hamizbeach safoina. Now, if you look at the parsha of olah, it's very interesting because the pasuk of olah talks about olah min atzayin and olah min ben boker. It only mentions safoina by the pasuk of if it's tzayin, but it doesn't discuss it if it's by ben habakar. So for the Gemara, Ashbichan ben tzayin, by a ben tzayin, that's where we know the Torah says safoina. But ben bakar minolan, how do you know if the korban olah is going to be a bakar? If it's going to be cattle, how do you know that also needs to be shechted on the tzafon side? Amar Kra, state in pasuk, v'im minat tzayin, when it introduces the parsha of olas tzayin after the Torah goes through olas bakar, it says v'im minat tzayin vav moisif al inyan rishon v'yilmoid el yoin mitach. Since it says v'im minat tzayin, we say that the earlier parsha, speaking about bakar, can be learned from the lower parsha, where it says v'im minat tzayin. And just like by tzayin, the Torah says shechted on the tzafon side, so too by the ben bakar shechted on the tzafon side. Vav moisif al inin rishon v'yilmad elyon mitachton. And the earlier parsha, which is Ben Abakar, will be learned from the secondary parsha, which is Ben Hatzayin. That would work out very well according to the Tana, who holds that you could do that. When you have a ve'im, who said ve'im means that you could learn one from the other. So this whole thing works really well if you hold you could. But if you hold, just because there's a vav there, introducing the next parsha, it doesn't mean that you can apply whatever you want from parsha B to parsha A. How do we know that Ben Abakar, if it's a carbon oil, needs to be shechted with safain? Now, where do you find, in fact, that there is a machlokes about this question of malamdim or not? The Tanya we learned, ve'im nefesh. So now we have to take a little detour to the parsha of Asham. The Torah discusses first the Asham brought by somebody who was moil b'hektish. And it says in the pasuk as follows. It says in the pasuk as follows, referring to someone who is moil b'hektish. Nefesh ki simoil mal v'chata b'shkaga. Someone who was moil, meaning he was moil b'hektish. Mikache Hashem. So he brings a carbon Hashem. What does he bring? The Hevias Hashomer Hashem, Ayil Tamim Minatzoin, Ve'ekach HaKesef, Shkolim, B'Shekel HaKodesh LaHashem. The next pasuk right after that is the parsha of Hashem Tali. And it says in the pasuk by Hashem Tali, Daber el b'nei Yisrael leimar nefesh kisechta b'shkaga mikol mitzvos Hashem asher loy seyasena v'asa me'achas mehena. Now the question is, what type of averis does someone bring an Hashem Tali for? Now we know for sure any avera where if it was done b'mezid, someone would be chayiv kares, and if it's done b'shoigeg, somebody is chayiv Chattas. Those averis for sure, like Chattas chayla. If someone is not sure whether or not he ate chaylev, there are two pieces of meat sitting side by side, and he thought they were both chulin, and he ate one of those pieces, and then he found out that one of these two was really chaylev. So he's not sure if he ate chaylev. If he knew he ate chaylev v'shoigig, that's a Chattas. If he doesn't know, then he brings an Hashem Tali. So that's the pashut case of Hashem Tali. The question is, what about for Me'ilah? If someone wasn't sure if he was moil, if someone knows he was moil, we know, so he brings an Hashem Me'ilah. But what if someone is not sure if he was moil? Do you bring an Hashem Tali for Me'ilah? So Zok the Gemara, it says the pasuk of Me'ilah is directly preceding the pasuk of Hashem Tali. And by Hashem Tali, it uses the word Ve'im Nefesh, Hisechta Ba'asa Achas Mikol Mitzvos Hashem. So the question is, does that vav tell me that just like the parasha before was speaking about Me'ilah, Hashem Tali also applies to a suffix if someone was over Me'ilah? That is exactly what our question is. So the Tanya we learned, Ve'im Nefesh is the word of Ve'im Nefesh talks about an Hashem Tali, and it's right after the pasuk talking about Hashem Me'ilais. L'chayiv al safek Me'ilais Hashem Tali divrei Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva holds that makes us chayiv an Hashem Tali. Why would he be chayiv an Hashem Tali? Because it's connected to the parsha of Hashem Tali that's right before the parsha. It's connected to the parsha of Me'ilah, which is right before the parsha of Hashem Tali. So Rabbi Kiva holds the Ve'im connects them. And the Chacham hold no. You do not bring an Hashem Tali from Me'ilah. You bring it for Chaylev. My love, what is the machlokes as to whether or not you would bring an Hashem Tali on a suffix Me'ilah? Mar Sover Lamed, Mati Rabbi Kiva holds, you learn from the Vav, Lamedim Tachtim in El Yoin, or El Yom in Tachtim, that you also bring an Hashem Tali for Me'ilah. And Umar Sover and the Chachamim hold Potter, Sover Lamed. So going back to our shaila, we're using vav moisav al yin rishon to tell you that a ben habakar needs shchita b'tzafon. That'll be told in the machloikish Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. Zok Gemara my love, al kamil di mar sav l'meidin, mar sav en l'meidin. Amar Papa no, the chulam l'meidin. Everybody holds you. So therefore, everybody agrees with our drasha by Olah that side tzon and side bakar the shchita needs to be b'tzafon. What's the machlokes whether or not you bring a nashim toli from Elah behind the time with the Rabbanon? I'll tell you why the Rabbanon hold you don't. Since you learned about Avada, you could. So why would the Rabbanon hold you potter? Because you have another Gzeir Shavah. Nemer kan mitzvahs. It says mitzvahs in the parsha of Osham Toli. Daber el bnei Yisrael nefesh ki sechta b'shkaga mikol mitzvahs Hashem. V'nemer b'chatas chaylav mitzvahs. And when the Torah talks about the chiyuv to bring carbon Chattas, it also says mitzvahs. It says in the pasuk. It says in the pasuk by the parsha of Chattas chaylav. It says mitzvahs. The pasuk daber el bnei Yisrael lemar nefesh ki sechta b'shkaga mikol mitzvahs Hashem. So side by the Osham Toli and side by the Chattas chaylav, it uses a lashon of mitzvahs, and we learn Gzeir Shavah. Mal lehalon dover shechayoven al zedoynei koros v'al Chattas like sofek chaylev, sofek dam. Afkan, so too, in order to be mechuyev and Osham Toli shechayoven al zedoynei koros v'al Chattas. But the Rabbanan say, but Me'ilah doesn't fit into that category because Me'ilah there's no koros al zedoynei. In fact, the more of Rabbi Kiva, what is Rabbi Kiva going to do with the Gzeir Shavah? How does Rabbi Kiva get around the Gzeir Shavah? Rabbi Kiva holds you do bring an Osham Toli for Me'ilah. Rabbi Kiva is going to use the Gzeir Shavah to teach us something else. And he'll say, Mal lahalon b'kfua avkan b'kfua lafuchei Chattas the tumash mikdash v'kadoshav the oil of yoredu. You know what you learn from the mitzvahs? They tell you the only thing you will bring an Osham Toli for is if you knew you were over b'shogeg, you would bring a Chattas, a regular Chattas. But if you knew you were over b'shogeg, you wouldn't bring a regular Chattas. You would only bring a carbon oil of yored. For that, there's no din Osham Toli. In short, there's no din to bring an Osham Toli if you were over b'safek b'shogeg, the aver that would trigger a chiyuv of a carbon oil of yored. For instance, tumas mikdash v'kadosha. Somebody's not sure if he went into the base of mikdash when he was tamei. Does he or doesn't he bring a Nashim Toli? He doesn't bring a Nashim Toli because even if you knew you were over at B'shogeg, you wouldn't bring a Chattas Kavua, you would bring a carbon oil of yored. V'Rabbanan, what about the Rabbanan? How does he now know to exclude Me'ilah? Maybe that's just the Gzeir Shavah of mitzvahs to exclude a various that would normally lead to a carbon oil of yored, like we just said in Rabbi Kiva. Zok Rabbanan in Gzeir Shavah l'mech, so you can't go half and half. If there's a Gzeir Shavah, it's both. Side, you would learn from Chattas that you don't bring a Osham Toli on Tumas Mikdash V'Kadosha, but you will also be able to learn that you don't bring a Osham Toli from Me'ilah. Rabbi Kiva Name in Gzeir Shavah l'mechza. So what's Rabbi Kiva going to do? How is he able to say that you don't make the Gzeir Shavah legabe the halacha of Osham Toli? You're right, so that's not the machlokes. We have to start with a nusvar. Let me tell you what this machlokes is over here. Rabbi Kiva Sovar the im nefesh ksiv vav moisav al in rishon. Now this doesn't sound like a new strategy. It just looks like we're going in circles. You know why Rabbi Kiva doesn't learn the Gzeir Shavah of mitzvahs to tell us that you don't bring a Nashim Toli on the Elah? Because you have the vav. Going back to the original vav, im nefesh. Zok to Gemara, we were just here before. Rabbanan nami yoksiv im nefesh. So Zok to Gemara, leim b'alkamivically. So now what do we have over here? We have a Gzeir Shavah of mitzvahs telling us that you shouldn't bring a Nashim Toli for Me'ilah, but you have mitzvahs is correct that you says you shouldn't bring a carbon Nashim Toli for Me'ilah, but you have the vav moisef to tell you that you should bring. So what do I listen to? I have a drasha of Gzeir Shavah pulling me one way, and I have a drasha of vav moisef pulling me the other way. The Gemara Savar hekesh adif. Rabbi Kiva holds the hekesh is adif, and therefore the vav in Navish will tell you, in fact, that you do bring a Asham Tali for the Aveira of Me'ilah. Mar Savar, but the Chamamold, Gzera Shava Adifa. The Gzera Shava is other. And therefore, since the Gzera Shava tells you not to bring a carbon Asham Tali for Me'ilah, you won't. Zok to Gemara, let's not say that's a machlok. It's like the Chula Alma, the Hekesh Adif. Everybody holds that the Hekesh is Adif than the Gzera Shava, and therefore the Svara should be that you do bring a carbon Asham Tali for the Aveira of Me'ilah. So why do the Rabbanan say you don't? I'll tell you why. Whenever you have a Vav Moisif, you don't say that you learn. You don't say that you learn the Elyon from the Tachton. Rather, you say you learn the Tachton from the Elyon. We learn a halacha by Asham Tali from Me'ilah. We don't learn a halacha by Me'ilah from Asham Tali. So you wanted to say that since there's a ve'im, it teaches us a halacha by Me'ilah, that you also bring an Asham Tali for it. That's not how it works, Dr. Rabbanan. It only works where you can learn a halacha by Asham Tali from, from Me'ilah. And what do you learn from Me'ilah? The Gomer Me'elyon La'asham Be'kesef Shkalim. To tell you that there's a minimum cost that the animal that you buy for your Asham Tali has to cost. It has to cost a minimum of 2 kesef shkolim. Now the rule is, the pasuk tells you beferish by the Asham Me'ilah that for an Asham Me'ilah you have to spend kesef shkolim. There's a minimum cost to the ayil that you have to purchase. The pasuk says regarding the Asham that you bring for Me'ilah, it says as follows. I'm going to read the words of the pasuk for you. It says, Nefesh kisima mal v'chata b'shkaga. We're talking about Me'ilah. Mikache Hashem v'hevius Hashem Hashem. And the pasuk is very specific what type of Hashem you need to bring for Me'ilah. Ayil tamim min atzoin ve'erkecha kesef shkolim b'shekel hakodesh loshem. You need to bring an animal that has the value of 2 shkolim. Zoktim the Gemara, the Im Nefesh, which connects the Asham Tali to the Asham Me'ilah, tells us that the same way that that minimum charge for a carbon of Asham Me'ilah of 2 shkolim, the Asham Tali has to cost the same amount. Now, logic would dictate that you shouldn't have to spend so much for an Asham Tali. And the reason for it is very simple. If you were Vadai 8 chelev, you bring a Chattas chelev. If you Sovik 8 chelev, you bring an Asham Tali. Now we know that the Chattas chelev itself can cost a fraction of 2 shkolim. So is it logical to say that if you were Vadai over Davera of Kares B'Shoigeg, you bring a tiny little carbon? But if it's only a Sovik if you were over the carbon, you should have to bring a carbon of 2 shkolim? That's a very big chiddush. So Zok to Gemara, that's why I need the Ve'im Nefesh to tell you, don't say that it doesn't make sense to spend more for the Asham Tali than you would spend for the Chattas. Rather, learn the Vav telling you that just like the parsha before, talking about Asham Me'ilah, you have to bring a carbon with a minimum value. So too, with Asham Tali, you need to bring a carbon with a minimum value. Let's see the Gemara inside. Don't say, how could you spend more on the Asham Tali than you would spend on the Chattas if you knew for sure you did Avera? And you would say, Ma vadoi Chattas bas danko. Just like if you were Vadai, if you Vadai ate Chela, you would bring a Chattas worth a couple of pennies. So too, the Sopik, when you bring a Noshim bar danko. That no, it's a Sopik. The Torah says you got to bring a big, expensive one. And that's what you learn from the Ve'im. Rabbi Kiva also holds that the Asham Tali has to be worth 2 shkolim. Where does he know it from? He's using the Ve'im to teach you that you bring an Asham Tali on Me'ilah. So how does he know this halacha that the Asham Tali has to be at least 2 shkolim? Nafkale mizois Torah Asham. The Torah says in the parsha of Asham, Zois Torah Asham. And when it says Zois Torah, it means all of the Ashamites have one uniform halacha. And therefore, if I know that one Asham, the Asham Me'ilah, has to be 2 shkolim, I automatically know that that same rule applies to all of the carbon notions. Zois Torah's Osham, Torah Achas, L'chol Hasham. Zok Gemara, that is not a universal svara. That's very much under dispute in the Gemara at the beginning of Maseches Menachos. So Teinach Man de Isle Torahs. If you hold the Machlokes Reb Shimon and the Rabbanon there in Menachos the Zois Torahs HaMincha, does it also mean to include all Menachos? So if you hold that Zois Torahs in fact means applying one halacha to the entire class of carbon, you have a good point. Rabbi Akiva has his Makar. But nonetheless, but what about the mandam who doesn't hold of this limud? Mehechel Gamar, we're back to square one. How do you know that a Dasham Tali has to be shtei kasef? Zok the Gamar, Gamar be'erkecha. Zok and Rashi. By Hasham Gzelois, it says be'erkecha. By Nasham Tali, it says be'erkecha. And by the Hasham Me'ilah, it says be'erkecha kesef shkolim. So we say, just like by the Hasham Me'ilah, it's be'erkecha kesef shkolim, be'erkecha means it has to be worth 2 shkolim, so to be'erkecha by our sugya of Hasham Toli, and be'erkecha by Hasham Gzelois also means 2 shkolim. Now, there's more than Hasham Toli and Hasham Gzelois and Hasham Me'ilah. What about Shivcha Charufa? Teinech heicha diksiv be'erkecha Hasham, where it says be'erkecha, in the Hasham which says be'erkecha, which is Hasham Toli and Asham Gzelois. But Asham Shivcha Charufa, the Leksiv be'erkecha, the Asham Shivcha Charufa, which doesn't say be'erkecha, Ma'i Kalamemer, how are you going to know that the Asham Shivcha Charufa also has to be worth 2 shkolim? Zakimar Gamar Ba'ayil Ba'ayil. By the parsha of Shivcha Charufa, it says Be'ela Asham, and it says the same nusach by the Asham Me'ilois. So let's have a look at the pasuk by Hasham Me'ilois. It says, Nevesh Kisim Omayel, Bechata Bishkoga Mikacha Hashem, Be'evis Hasham El Hashem, Eil Tamim or Ayil Tamim in Atzayin, Be'egcha Kesef Shkolam. So it says Ayil over there. By the Hasham Shivcha Charufa, it also says a similar Nasach, and it says as follows, Ves Hashama Yovi Lashem, Ayil Tamimim Minatzoin Be'erkecha. So, I'm sorry, that's not the pasuk of Be'erkecha, because that's the pasuk that we say it doesn't say Be'erkecha there. So it says it. I guess he doesn't read the pasuk down over here. So let's look at Rashi. Rashi quotes the pasuk. Okay, and it goes on. He says over here. Okay, it says Be'el Ha'asham. It says Be'el Ha'asham. Let me see. I don't have the pasuk here inside. In the Sifta Gemara that I was using, it quoted the pasuk, but by the parsha, Sham Shivcha Harufa, it says Be'el Ha'asham. So that's how we know. Just like the Asham of Me'ilois means a Asham worth 2 shkolim, so too the Hasham Shivcha Harufa. So let's have a look at this. We have Hasham Zelois, we have Hasham Me'ilois, we have Hasham Shivcha Harufa, and we have Hasham Toli. But what about Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mitzayr? So Frank Rashi, Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mitzayr, how do we know that they have to be 2 shkolim? So Rashi, they don't have to be 2 shkolim. They don't have to be 2 shkolim. How do I know? Because by all of the other Kabbalah says ayil, it has to be a ram. By the Hasham Nazir and Hasham Mitzayr, it says keves ben shana, which is only a year old. A ram is 2 years old. For sure, the keves ben shana is worth way less than the ayil. So clearly, the Torah is telling us that the Asham Nazir and Asham Mitzayr does not have to be worth shtei shkolim. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we've now clarified how you know that by a carbon Olah, side by Bakr, and side by Tzoin, it has to be a Shchita B'tzafim. Zok Gemara, Chattas minolei de B'tzafim. How do we know that the Chattas has to be B'tzafim? Now it's very important, in order for us to understand this Gemara, which is a little bit complex, that we have a little bit of a picture of the psukim that we're talking about. So the first pasuk that I want to introduce to Olam to is in Parshas Tzav, which is a general pasuk that discusses Chattas in general, and the Lashon HaPasuk is I have to grab a chumash so I can show you the pasuk. One moment, please. So the pasuk if you have chumash, it's kedai to pull one because it does get a little bit complex. So in Parashas Tzav is the general tzivui of the Chattas. What it says over here is as follows. It's right at the beginning of Parshas Tzav. Let me see if I can even hold it up to the screen so you could see it. I'm not sure if you're able to see it. It looks like it's very blurry, not focusing. Let me see if it'll focus. No, it doesn't seem to be focusing. So I just have to read it for you. So it says in the pasuk, Perak Vov, pasuk Yudches, Daber el Aharon ve'albonav lemor, Zois Teiras Achatos, B'mkoim asher tishachet ha'olah tishachet achatos. So that is the general pasuk of Chattas, and it tells us it needs to be shechted where you shech the oil. That's pasuk number 1. We have to learn 4 psukim now. So pasuk number 1 is talking about the general category of Chattas. It says that b'mkoim asher yishchet is achatos tishachet oil. The other 3 psukim are in Vayikra, and there's a whole bunch of parshas that are in a row. Remember we had Parkonim Mashiach, Pahelam Davar, Nosi, and then it talks about a regular korban. So we're going to start with Nosi. By a Nosi, which is Vayikra Dalid, pasuk Chav Beis, Asher Nosi Yechta. What is the korban Chattas of a Nosi? So the pasuk says on pasuk Chav Dalid, Vayikra Dalid Chav Dalid, V'samach Yodei al Rosh HaSair, V'shachat Oisoi B'mkoim Asher Yishchat Es Ha'oil. So now we have already 2 psukim in the parsha of Chattas that says you need to shech it where you shech oila, by the general heading of Chattas and by the Chattas of a Nasi. After the Chattas of a Nasi, the Torah talks about a Yochid bringing a carbon. And the Torah talks about bringing a carbon from either a Seir, a Seirah, a female. So by the Nasi, it's a Sa'ir. It's a male goat or sheep. But by the Yochid, it's a female. So it says, "V'hebi karbonai seiras izim timima nekeva achatos hashachata." It says in the pasuk, "V'samach as yoda al rosh achatos v'shachat es achatos b'mkay ma'ila." So now we have a 3rd pasuk that says b'mkay ma'ila, and then the pasuk goes on and talks about a keves. What if you bring a keves for the carbon? Again, that's a nekeva for a yachid. And again, it says, "V'samach es yoda al rosh achatos." So we have 4 psukim that say that you shech the chatos where you shech the oila. The only pasuk that I want to point out has a little bit of a hint to teach us a little extra is by the parsha of the Nosi. Everywhere else it says v'shachat es achatos b'mkoim ha'oila. Here it says by the Nosi it says v'samach yodei al rosh hasoyer v'shachat oisoi. Doesn't say v'shachat es achatos. Oisoi sounds like it's some type of miyut. It sounds like it's excluding something. So now that we have these 4 psukim, now let's have a look at the Gemara. So Zog to Gemara, all the way at the bottom of the Amid, Zog to Gemara. Chatos minolan by tzofan dechsiv v'shachat es achatos b'mkoim ha'oila. Now this pasuk is not the pasuk that's the general pasuk. It's not the pasuk by the Nasi. It's the pasuk by the Yachid who's bringing a Seira, and it says if a Yachid brings a Seira, v'shachat es achatos b'mkoim ha'oila. So that tells you that the Chattas needs to be shechted by the tzofan. Zok to Gemara, ashkechan shchita. Okay, I know the carbon needs to be shechted by tzofan. Kabbalah minolam. How do I know the Kabbalah Saddam also has to be b'tzofan? Zok to Gemara diksiv. Now there's a shiloh what pasuk it's referring to, but according to the simplest pshat, it's referring to the same pasuk that we just mentioned, and it says as follows: and the very next pasuk is so it doesn't seem like he changed locations right after the shechita. He made the Kabbalah. Pashtus, it's also bitzafon. So Belokach HaKoyin, our Gemara reads midam, but if you look at the Shita Mekubetes, the Zion, it'll say midama. Because Belokach HaKoyin midam is by the next parsha by a keves. It doesn't make a difference. It's just simpler to stick to Seir, which is to Seira, which is what we're talking about. So Belokach HaKoyin midama. If I'm not mistaken, Rashi also quotes midama. Let me see if Rashi has the word midama. I don't see it in Rashi, but that's Pasha's what it's referring to. Okay, Gavalti. So Zok Gemara. Okay, so now we know that the Kabbalah Saddam have to occur with Safan. But Mekabel Atzmai Minalam. We learned in last pair that the Shechita has to occur on the Tzofan, but the Sheikhah doesn't have to be with Tzofan. He can be shechting from a distance with a long knife. But we learned that by the Kabbalah, the Kohen also has to be b'tzafon. How do we know that? Mekabel atzmai minolam. Omar kra v'lokach, and we dash in lo yikach. The pasuk v'lokach hakoyin midama. So Rashi says you chop up the word v'lokach and you break it into lo yikach. He himself has to be taken. So not only does the dam have to be taken b'tzafon, the kohen has to be b'tzafon when he does the Kabbalah. So now we have the psukim to tell us everything we need to know. We know that by kachim, in order for something to be ma'akiv, it has to be repeated. So far, we found one pasuk to tell us shchita b'tzafon and Kabbalah b'tzafon, and the makabel needs to be b'tzafon. La'akiv b'nayin. How do we know if we don't check b'tzafon, the carbon will be possible? Zokt Gemara krach minuksiv. We have another pasuk. And now we're going back to the pasuk earlier from what we just discussed. So we were just working with the pasuk of a Chattas yachid by a seira, and now we're going back to the Chattas of a nosi b'seir, a male animal, which is right before the pasuk that discusses the Chattas of a yachid. And it says by the Chattas of a nosi, v'shachat oisoi b'mkoim asher yishchat es ha'oil. It's repeated. Tanya, and we learned. Now we need to look in the Shita Mekubetes, because the Shita Mekubetes adds some words to this brisa. So with Tanya we learned, and I'm going to on my page. It's Tess in the Shita Mekubetes. Vitanya v'shachat oisoi b'mkoim asher yishchat. Shech the chatos for the nasi where you would shech the oil. Zok the brisa heichon oila nishchates. Where is the oil shechted? B'tzafon. Uma oil b'tzafon, avze b'tzafon. So that's how we know that the seir nasi needs to be shechted b'tzafon. Okay, now let's turn on to Amud Beis. Correct the Gemara. Why do I need this pasuk by the Sir Nasi to tell you that the Sir Nasi, the Chattas of the Nasi, has to be shechted b'tzafon? But like Farnemar, it says in the general heading of Karbanis Chattas that we quoted earlier from Parshas Tzav, but like Farnemar b'mokom asher tishachet ha'oila tishachet ha'chattas. But in Parshas Tzav, when the Torah is speaking about the general heading of the Chattas, the Torah already says you got to shech where you shech the oila. So why does the Torah have to repeat this again when we're talking about a nasi? Halama yotza. Why does the Torah repeat it? It must be l'kfaya le'makayim shim l'shachta b'tzafayin pasuk. The Torah had to repeat it. By repeating it a second time, by the Sir Nasi, we learn that this halach of tzafayin by all chatois is ma'akav even b'di'ev. So far, so good. Are you so sure that the reason why it was mentioned again by the Sir Nasi is to tell us that it's ma'akib? There might be another very important reason why the Torah told us by the Sir Nasi that it needs to be shechted b'tzafon. If you remember, I pointed out an anomaly in the parsha of Sir of the Nasi. And there it says v'shachat oisoi And we learn a diak from there. We could possibly learn a diak from there that the only type of male, because it's very unique that the kohen brings a male animal, not the kohen, the nasi brings a male seir, unlike the yechidim who bring a female. So maybe we make the following diak. The only male Chattas that you shech b'tzafain is oisoi, davka de sir nasi. But other male Chattais do not have to be shech b'tzafain. And maybe that's why it says the parsha of V'shachad oisoi, maybe you know why it repeats it by the nasi? So that we can make the dik of oisoi to exclude other Chattais that are also brought male. And in a moment we'll see which ones those are. So Einoi Ella, Shezeton Tzofin, Veinakarton Tzofin. Now, what are the other carbonas that we're talking about? Zokt Rashi, Se'ira Yom HaKippurim, and Se'ira Avodas Kechavim, V'shal Musafe HaMoyadois. Those are all male Se'irim. The one that's brought on Yom Kippur, the ones that are brought on as the Musafin, and the ones that are Se'ira Avodas Kechavim. Maybe those are excluded. Oisoi. After this here, the male Sir Nasi Chatos is shech with the Tzofoin, but maybe the Sir Kippurim, Avodas Kechavim, and Musaf HaYamoyadois, maybe they don't need Tzofoin. And maybe that's how it repeats it. So you don't have an extra pasuk that tells us that you have to shech with the Tzofoin to make it be ma'akid. Zok Gemara Talmud Loimar, we have another pasuk. It says V'shachat es achatos b'mkoim ha'olah. It says the shachat is a chattas b'mkoim ha'olah. Where is this? Which pasuk is this? The shachat is a chattas b'mkoim ha'olah is Vayikra Vav Yud Ches. So Vayikra Vav Yud Ches is Parshas Tzav. It says Daber line Valvan of Lamer, so it's Torah Chatas, Bimkoim Ashi Tishachet Ha'olah, Tishachet Chatas. So I got the wrong pasuk. That's the one in Tzav. No, V'shachet Chatas Bimkoim Ha'olah, that is a different pasuk. That's in Parshas. That's in Parshas Vayikra. So that's Vayikra Dalet. I'm sorry, that's Vayikra Dalet Chavtes, which is the psukim that we were referring to. Dalet Chavtes is the pasuk of the seer of a yochid. By the seer of a yochid, it says the samach es yodei al reish chatos, the shachid is a chatos of kol ma'olah. That's by the seer. So zok to Gemara, when it says by the seer of a yochid, by the seira, sorry, it's a female, by the seira of a yochid, it says the shachad es a chatos of kol ma'olah. The question is, why does it say ha chatos? It could have said the shachat b'mkoim ha'olah. Ha-chatos is to tell you that not only this chatos that we're talking about, but ha-chatos, every chatos. Ze bona'av l'chol chatos sheyehu te'unois tzafon. To tell us, don't listen to the oisoi, don't listen to the oisoi. That's mentioned by the Sir Nasi, to exclude the chatos that we mentioned from the chiyuv of tzafon. No, you have an extra pasuk by the seira of a shchatas yochid that says the shachat is hachatos to tell you that all tatois need tzafon. So now let's do an inventory. Zok Gemara Ashchan Seir Nasi Bein Lemitzah Bein La'akus. Now we shlugged up Oisoi. Oisoi is not made to be Mamaitos Chatois because of the shachat is hachatos. So now let's look at what we got. We have the general pasuk of B'mkoim Mashet Tishachat Oilah Tishachat Hachatos in Parshas Tzav, and we have by the Seir Nasi, it says Shechtet where you shech the oilah. That's redundant. So right off the bat, I have two psukim that talk about a Seir Nasi that says you have to shech b'tzafon. So therefore, Ashkelon Seir Nasi bein lemitzvah bein la'akum. Now shar chatois nami. What about all other chatois? Ashkelon lemitzvah. We know the mitzvah because of the main heading of the Makar Masher Tishachet Oilah Tishachet Chatas. But how do you know La'akev Minolam? How do you know La'akev? Zok to Gemara, the Chsiv V'Kasba Uchsiv V'Seira. Now Rashi learns Remember, the Seira is first, the Kaspa is second. Rashi learns from the fact that it said it B'Seira, which we quoted a minute ago, which proves that you're not supposed to darshan the Yosy for all those other Karbanis. Therefore, it has a repetition. You have the Vishachat es Chattas b'mkoim Olah. You have the general heading of b'mkoim Masher Tishachad Olah Tishachad Chattas. That includes all Chatois, Saila Mitzvah, and Saila Achli. The only link that's missing is those three Chatois. We don't have two psukim to tell us that they have to be B'tzofim, because one of the psukim is just to neutralize the Isai. So Zokt the Gemara, according to Rashi, Uchsiv B'Seira. It says B'Kasma and Seira. So we have one more extra pasuk of a shachar is a Chattas b'Kama Olah to cover even for those other Seirim of Chattas, such as Yom Kippurim, Avodas Kechavim, Musaf Yadois. They're also B'tzofim and they're Ma'akev B'diyah. Gewaltig. So for the Gemara, now that you've neutralized the diak from Oisai, and you're telling me don't make the diak dafke the sir nosi ishechli b'tzofim, but not other male chatois. So then, what is the Oisai for? What is the Oisai being memayit Oisai lomali? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you what it's for. Mi boile lechedetanya. We needed to teach us a different halacha. Oisai b'tzofim ve'ein sir nachshoin b'tzofim. Davke Oisai is b'tzofim. Davke, what do you shech b'tzofim? The seer of Anosi. But you don't shech the seer of the Nachshoin b'tzofim. What is seir Nachshoin? Rashi tells us it's the seir that the Nesiim brought by the Chanukas HaMishkan. Why is it called seir Nachshoin? Because we know the first Nasi that brought us carbon was Nachshoin by Aminodov. So all of the karbanis that all of the Nesiim brought by the Chanukas HaMishkan are referred to as Seir Nachshon. So to tell us that Davka Oisai B'tzofim, the Seir Chattas that we bring L'doyros is B'tzofim, but the Seir Nachshon wasn't B'tzofim, and that was a Chattas. It was brought as a Chattas. Utanya we learned, B'samach Yodai al Roisha Seir. It says you make smicha al Roisha Seir. That pasuk, let's see where that pasuk is. That pasuk is V'samach Yodei. Again, it's Vayikra Daled Chav Daled. It's referring to the Seirah brought by a Nasi. No, sorry, by a Yachid. No, I might be wrong. No, it's talking about a Nasi. Asher Nasi Yechta, it says V'samach Yodei al Roisha Seir, and we dashin V'samach Yodei l'Rabbi Seir Nachshon l'Smicha. That the Seir Nachshon, meaning not only was the Seir Nasi who did an Aveir l'Doiris, did they do Smicha on it? They did Smicha on all of the Seir Chattas that the Nesiim brought by the Chanukas HaMishkan. L'Rabbi Seir Nachshon l'Smicha. Divi Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda holds. Rabbi Shimon Omer, l'Rabbi Seirei Avodas Kechavim l'Smicha. To tell you that all Seirei Avodas Kechavim, you have to do Smicha on them. If a Yochid or Tzibur does Avodah Zarah b'Shoigeg, you would need Smicha. So let's go to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Seir of Nachshon we're learning needs Smicha. So Solkadai Techamina, I would have thought, Hoyel v'Yisrabu l'Smicha. We have a pasuk that includes the Seir Nachshon and say just like the Seir Nasi needs Smicha, so too the Seir Nachshon needs Smicha. Maybe the Seir Nachshon also needs Tzafon. Maybe it's Rabu Namul Tzafon. Kamash V'lan Oisoi. By the Seir Nasi it says Oisoi Yushech B'Tzafon, but not the Seir Nachshon. Zog to Gemara, Matzka V'lo Ravina. Hanichal Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who we just said learns that V'samach includes the Seir Nachshon, I understand why I need Oisoi to exclude the Seir Nachshon L'gabi Tzafon. But the Rabbi Shimon, who never included the Seir Nachshon to begin with, he held that the V'samach Yodei al Roisha Seir is referring to Seirei Avodas Kechavim, so he never saw any connection whatsoever to the Seir Nachshon. So why would I need a pasuk to tell you that you don't need Tzavim but a Seir Nachshon? It has no shaykhs over here. Michael Neymar. Amalei Marzuta Breidav Tevi L'Ravina. Ula Rabbi Yehuda minicha, when according to Rabbi Yehuda is better, just because Rabbi Yehuda has a special pasuk to include Sir Nachshon and Smicha, why would you draw a line from Smicha to Tzafon? You have a limit for Smicha, you don't have a limit for Tzafon. So why do I need a miyat for Tzafon? Why would I think Tzafon? Ula Rabbi Yehuda minicha, l'may Yisrabi. Yes, I have a limud that the Sir Nachshon needs Smicha. But am I the lo Yisrabi? But I have no limit whatsoever to say that Sir Nachshon should require tzafon. So why do I need a meat for it? Zok to Gemara, v'chi tema. If you're going to say, Eloi maite kra, if we don't have a meal to tell you, you don't have to shech the Sir Nachshon b'tzafon, I might have thought that you have to. Havamina taisi b'vinyanav. I would have thought you would just make a binyanav midoros, just like all chatois need tzafon. Maybe so just like just like all chatois need tzafon. Maybe the Sir Nachshon needed tzafon as well, and that's why I needed the outside. Back to Gemara. Well, if that's the case, imkain smicha gufei teisim b'binyanav. Why did the Gemara need a pasuk? Why did the Brisa need a pasuk of hasoyer? To include Sir Nachshon, if you have a binyanav and you wanted to say the binyanav would work for tzafon, if not for the meat of Yosy, so you have a meat for the smich as well. Why do we need a special limud? Ella, the teretz is midayros like amrina. You can't make a binyanav from a chattas that ledayros to a chattas that was a one-shot deal by the Chanukas Hanasiyim. So therefore, you won't learn smicha. You need a special pasuk for smicha. But by the same token, hachanami midayros like amrina, and you can't use it for tzafon either. So we're back to the drawing board. Why do I need Yosy to be Mamayas Sir Nachshon from tzafon? Why would I think it would be tzafon? So therefore, we're aborting that teretz, and now we need to find another purpose for the Yosy that the Torah mentions by the Sir Chattas of a Nasi. And we're going to say Yosy b'tzafon, ze'ein shoichet b'tzafon. Dafka, the animal has to be b'tzafon, but the shoichet himself doesn't have to be b'tzafon. Frank the Gemara, I don't need Yosy to tell me that. Shoichet mid Rabbi Achia nafka. Rabbi Achia taught us from a different nekar that the shoichet himself doesn't have to be b'tzafon. The Tanya we learned, Rabbi Achia Omer, Yishachat Yosy al yerach hamizbeach tzafon. Ma Talmud Lomer. Why does the Torah need to say this? Levishometzinu Omer b'tzafon. Umekabel b'tzafon. We also know that you have to be mekabel the dam b'tzafon. We know that the kabbalah dam has to be b'tzafon. We just learned it on Amar Aleph. V'im amad b'darim v'kibel b'tzafon. But if the kohen was standing b'darim and he reached in to the tzafon side to do the kabbalah, possible. It would be possible. Yochel afsa came. I would have thought the shechita is the same way. That if the shechita occurs in the tzafon, but the shoichet standing in the darim and leaning over, it would be possible, just like it would be possible by the Kabbalah Saddam. The animal needs to be b'tzafon, the eina shoichet b'tzafon. So oibazoi, I already have a makar from the shachat Yosy that the shechita has to be b'tzafon, but not the shoichet. So why do I need the Yosy by the Sir Chattas of a Nasi? Again, we need to find a purpose for it. Zok Gemara, maybe you use it for something else. Yosy b'tzafon, dafka the Sir Chattas of a Nasi is b'tzafon, ve'ein ben oif b'tzafon. But when you do the malika on a Chattas oif, that does not have to be done b'tzafon. The Tanya we learned, Yochel yehei ben oif ton tzafon. You would have thought that when a kohen does malika on an oif, it should need to be done b'tzafon v'dinu, and there's actually a pretty good argument to say that. Uma ben tzoin, madich itzoin, shaloi kava kohen. You don't even need a kohen to do shchita. We learned that shchita is kesher bizarre. Nevertheless, kava tzafon, it still has to be on the tzafon. Ben oif, whose malika is much more chomer, shekava kohen. Not anybody could do the malika. Only a kohen can do the malika. So if it has such restrictions that the Ben Tzoin don't have, Kol Shekain, it should need to be restricted to the tzafon. Ein Eidin, Sheyikvaloi b'tzafon, Talmud Lomer Yosy. That's what we could use our oisoi for. It says, v'shachat oisoi, but the sir nasi, davke the soin needs shchita b'tzafon, but an oif would not need malika b'tzafon. Zok to Gemara, you can't use it for that. Right? We can't use it for that. Why? Because Ma'ale ben soin shekein kavaloi kli. I don't need oisoi to tell me that you don't need to do belika b'tzafon. You told me that the reason why I need a pasuk is because otherwise, using a kal v'chomer from a ben soin, I would say that an oif needs to be also, the malika needs to be b'tzafon. But it's not true. You don't have a kal v'chomer because Ma'ale ben soin shekein kavaloi kli. Do you know why? A ben soin needs shchita b'tzafon? Because it has a chumrah. You need to use a keli to kill it. A chalif is a keli. But malika doesn't need any keli. It's done with the hands of the kohen. So you see, it's less chomer in this respect than the shchita of a ben soin. So therefore, just because a ben soin needs to be b'tzafon, who said that a ben oif has to be b'tzafon? So I don't need oisai for that. So once again, we don't have a purpose for the oisai mentioned by the parsha of Sir Nosi, where it says in the pasuk, "V'shachat oisai b'mkayim asher yishchat es ha'olah." What is that oisai for? Zok Gemara, el oisai b'tzafon vein pesach b'tzafon. Maybe it's to tell you that the carbon pesach does not have to be shechted b'tzafon. Why would I think otherwise? The Tanya Rabbi Elazar and Yaakov Omer, Yochel ye pesach ton tzafon. I would have thought that the carbon pesach has to be shechted on the tzafon, even though it's kodesh kalim. Vidinu, and I have a kal v'chomer to make that argument. Uma oila, madach carbon oila. There's no specific time to bring an oila. You can bring an oila any day you want. Nevertheless, kavaloi tzafon, there's a kvias that it has to be b'tzafon. Pesach, shekavaloi zman l'shchitasai. Pesach, which is so much more restricted, there's only one specific day where you bring the carbon Pesach, and that's Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Ein oidin sheyikvaloi tzafon. Surely there should be a kvias that you can only shecht it on the tzafon of the Asara. Talmud Lomer Oisai. That's why I need Oisai by Tisir Nasim. Zok Gemara, your kal v'chomer is not good. Mala oila shekein kolil. Don't bring me a rye from oil that needs tzafon. You know why oil needs tzafon? Because it's completely burnt on the mizbeach. The Korban Pesach, the Bailam eats. Zok Gemara, okay, so bring a rye mechatos. Zok Gemara, what do you mean? Malachata shekein nechaperes al chay v'krisos. So it's a dover chomer. That's why I need tzafon. Zok Gemara be'oshim, but what about from an oshim you can bring a kal v'chomer? I'm madach and oshim you can bring any time. You need tzafon, kosh kon Pesach, that you can only bring one day, you need tzafon. Zok Gemara, mala oshim shem koche kochim. Oshim is koche kochim. Koche kochim needs tzafon. It's a heilig, more heilig than the kochim column. You can't bring a rye to carbon Pesach. Zok Gemara, once you came up with this teretz, mikul anami shekein koche kochim. So that slugs up the kal v'chomer from Olah and from Chattas and from Oshim. So once again, why in the world would I think that a carbon Pesach needs tzafon, that I need oisay to be mamayit? Zok Gemara la'olam ki da'amrin meikara. So we're going to go back to plan A that we slugged up. What was that? La'olam ki da'amrin meikara oisay b'tzafon ve'ein shoichet b'tzafon. The kashalach we do Achi nafka lon. We already learned that from Rav Achia. Zok to Gemara, true. Rav Achia already taught us that the shoichet doesn't have to be b'tzafon. But what we want to say an extra k'neitzer here. We're not coming to be b'mayit that the shoichet doesn't have to be b'tzafon. Because you're right, we know that from Rav Achia. Ella ein shoichet b'tzafon aval mikabel b'tzafon. What we're learning from here is from Oisai is that Rabbi Chia taught us that the shoichet doesn't have to be b'tzafon. That's Oisai. Dafke the shchita, but the mikabel he has to be b'tzafon. Frank Gemara, but we have a makar for that as well. Mikabel milokach v'lokach nafka. We just had on Namad Aleph. It says v'lokach. We learned loikach that the person himself, the kohen himself, doing the Kabbalah must be b'tzafon. So mikabel milokach v'lokach nafka. Zok Gemara, no, lokach v'lokach loy mashmalei. You can say that this Tana who uses Yosy to be Memayit, he holds I need Yosy to be Memayit that the Dafka, the Shechita has to be B'tzafon and not the person, not the Shechet, Dafka the Behemoth to be B'tzafon, and not the Shechet, but by Zrika, but by Kabbalah, the Mekabel himself, the person himself, the Kohen himself, must be B'tzafon, and he learns it from Yosy because he does not hold that you can learn it from the Velokach Loikach. He doesn't like that drasha. Okay, Baruch Hashem. So let's do an inventory. We already found the makar that there's a mitzvah lechatchila to shech the oila b'tzafon. Kabbalah nami, Kabbalah as well. You have one pasuk that tells you that it has to be done b'tzafon lemitzvah ashlichan. But the question is shchita v'Kabbalah la'akev. By Chattas we already brought psukim. But how do you know that the oila, it's ma'akiv even b'di'eved, if you don't check b'tzafon, then it will be possible? And how do you know the Kabbalah as well? Amar Rabbi Barabba v'temer Rabbi Bar Shila kal v'chomer. It's a simple kal v'chomer. Uma Chattas habo mikoyach oila ma'akeves. We just went through a whole Amid Gemara showing that the Chattas, it's ma'akiv for this shchita to be b'tzafon. How do we know Chattas? It's only because it says v'shachet is a Chattas, v'mkoyim asher shachet is a oila. So if Chattas, which is only derived from oila, we have psukim to say that it's ma'akiv, oila shabah Chattas mikoycha, oila which is the makor of Chattas, ein oidin sheme'akeves. It should surely be ma'akiv, and it should be possible with the evet if you don't shech the oila b'tzafon. Zakhtama, you don't have a right. Because malachatos shekein mechaperes al chai v'krisas. That's not a kal v'chomer. I can slug up the kal v'chomer very easily. Malachatos has a chumrah over oila. It's mechaperes al chai v'krisas. Amar v'ina hakash l'ilei Rav Ada Barabba. Rav Ada Barabba is not asking mamash a kal v'chomer. He's making a simple logical argument. Klum atzinu tafel chamer min eker. The Chattas is the tafel. It only learns the halacha of tzafon from the oila. You ever find a case where the source is going to be more kal than what you derive from the source? It doesn't make sense to say that the oila only needs tzafon the chatchila, but Chattas that you only know the chi of tzafon and you derive it from oila, that is b'di'evet. That's not mistaber. So therefore, we know that surely an oila, it's ma'akev b'di'evet if you don't make the shchita and the Kabbalah b'tzafon. Amalei Marzuta Bereda of Mori Ravina. So Marzuta asked, are you so sure about your rule? Veloy, are you telling me you never ever find such a situation where what you derive will be more chomer than the source itself? I'm going to show you that there's plenty of examples of cases where the derived is even more chomer than the source. But a meiser, what about meiser? The hu nifta, meiser itself, if it became tamei, normally you cannot be paid in meiser sheni in Yerushalayim. But if it became tamei in Yerushalayim, then you could be paid. Because of meiser, but if you already were paid in the meiser and you bought something else with it and it became tamei, ain't nifta. So you see clearly that the derived, the item that was derived from the meiser, you can't be paid if it's tamei. And if the meiser itself became tamei, you could be paid. So you see a case where it's more chomer that you derive from meiser than meiser itself. So I bezah your whole raya from oila and Chattas is faulty. Okay, we'll stop here. It was a pretty challenging daf today, and tomorrow is not going to be any easier. So we have to really focus. But Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish daf Mem Ches Mayach, and Be'ez Hashem, we should be zoicha to finish daf after daf after daf, and we should be zoicha to the real avodah in Yerushalayim b'kar mamish.
Amen. Kavach.
Ach, Yitvach.
Yitvach.
Yitvach.